welcome everyone. So this is augustalt.net, and we have an exciting talk for you today, but we also have Francis here as our new co-organizer. So yeah, Richard stepped down after, 14 or 15 years, which was very sad, and we will miss him. But we're so happy to have Francis with us now that we'll have to leave this sadness aside. So Francis is in Amsterdam, but it's all right. He's an Australian citizen, and you might have actually met him at the physical alt.net user groups when we used to have them in ThoughtWorks. And also he's given some online presentations, so you might remember some of those from previous months and previous years. So Francis, you want to say a few words to usher yourself into this new role of great responsibility, power, importance to the tech community, etc.?
Thanks, James. It's certainly an honor, and I know Richard's shoes are quite huge to fill, and I don't know if I can, match his 14 or 15 years at the helm of this great meetup group. But yeah, I couldn't just sit by and watch it die. So that's why I had to step up and ask if I could be the co-organizer for the group, even though I wasn't based in Sydney. But I'm hoping that actually being outside of Sydney and being in somewhere like in Amsterdam and in Europe, I can actually reach out to speakers over here that might be interested in talking to the channel. So I think hoping to usher a new era that you yourself, James, and Richard have obviously built, and I can hopefully build upon that.
Yeah, so things are looking healthy for the group. Actually, we have speakers till the end of the year, in fact, even, which is an unprecedented level of organization for the group, and a lot of it's thanks to Francis, in fact. So Alex is from Amsterdam as well. Is that right? Just
yep.
Checking. Yes, I thought so. Just thought I'd double check, because you could actually be in America for all we know, and we do have another speaker from America later. So yes, thank you very much for coming on the show today. And I'm sure you've all read the meetup site. So Alex is going to tell us about micro-frontends, and he's got a very swish presentation on it as well. So do you play the guitar as well, Alex? See some.
I'd say a little bit.
In a band or just casually?
Yeah, I'm playing in jazz orchestra. Like we do gigs which not so many people attend, in the small Dutch cities people never heard of. And also have a couple of my personal projects where I record and compose music.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Thanks for asking.
So, no, I have my guitars downstairs actually rather than upstairs, so there's none behind me, but I'm not so professional at all. I just play with a friend sometimes, so I'm impressed. So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say that it's about experience. If you like it, it matters the most. It's not about how professional you are.
I'll keep trying, and maybe I need to practice more, actually, is the other thing. So, yeah, Alex works at FreshBooks with Francis. Oh no, we've lost Francis. I think he's coming back, though. When he does, we'll put him back. Let's put him back into the stream. Here he is. Hello, Francis. You disappeared on us already. I can't believe that. So we have the JetBrain licenses to give away. Hey, we have Richard here. Richard is tuned in. That is awesome. You'll have to heckle triple as hard, Richard, from the chat window. Thank you for coming. So I suppose we should really get into the main content of the show. So I'll bring up Alex's presentation. Is there anything else you want to say at this point, Francis?
No, I think I've actually went all the way down to the city of Eindhoven, which is about an hour and a half away from Amsterdam by train, just to see Alex's talk, and it was actually fantastic. So, which is why I really wanted his talk to be the first talk of the new alt.net kind of era, if you like. So I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I did.
Thank you. So I'll add Alex's presentation here, and I'll put him on the top because he's the most important here. And as usual, if you've got any questions, I'll stick them up as we go and interrupt Alex at an appropriate time without trying to interrupt his flow too much, but not have your questions get too long in the tooth. So yeah, over to you, Alex.
Thanks for such a nice introduction. I really appreciate your feedback, Francis. Let me give a little bit of the context of what I'm doing and why I think I should be here talking about microfrontends. So in FreshBooks, I'm leading 3 frontend teams, and we are responsible for pretty much all what impacts our frontend as a platform, and not specifically building features. So it's observability, performance, accessibility, going international, and also pipelines, tests, and in particular microfontins. So when I started working in the company 3.5 years ago, we had a very large frontend monolith, and we had a lot of struggle, and so let's talk about it. To give you an idea how big our code base was, we had, by the moment I joined the company, we had 13,000 merged pull requests. We had almost 90,000 commits, 173 contributors, and we deployed around 15 times a day. And now this is even more than it has been before. And with the big power comes a big responsibility. And it was really hard to maintain this responsibility given that our framework of choice was Ember. It has been chosen in 2014, where it has been much more promising option than it is now. And if you can take a look into state of JS, by the moment we were making the decision, the Ember was, frankly speaking, not the most beloved front-end framework. So we had to do something about it. It had a lot of implications about hiring people. We were really desperate to find anybody who knows Ember, and we were hiring people who were willing to learn Ember. And you can imagine motivation of people who know that they are learning the framework they would never use in their next job. So the degree of commitment wasn't extremely high, and I cannot judge people for that. So we were looking around how to solve that, and we also had concerns about the quality of open source libraries available for Ember, and not only quality, but also quantity. There were a lot of good things which are available out of the box, out of the shelf for frameworks like React or Vue.js. But yeah, for Ember, a lot of those things we had to build from scratch, and it wasn't extremely promising for us. So that was the first problem. And the second problem was the fact that it's monolith. We had a circle of gatekeeping people who had to communicate with everybody who is opening pull requests. And the more people you have working on something, the harder it is to coordinate your efforts. And you can eventually get into the decision-making paralysis. If you need 30 people to agree on some simple decision, you can spend like days discussing how to code the folder. And we didn't want it to happen. So idea was to decentralize our front ends, give more power to the people who are going to work on stuff, and reduce the blast radius of mistakes. Like if we give people freedom, we want to make sure that their mistakes aren't going to damage the whole product. So that was the goal we pursued. To illustrate the problem, like imagine that you have a lot of people working on something, and you are coming with very reasonable offer. Like you know what exactly you need to do. You know what the outcome is going to be, how much time you need to do to invest into doing this feature. And then you start your arguments. You have somebody who has some painful topics on their shoulders they wanted to discuss for a long time, and they think it's a good time to chip in. And it just escalates. You get a product owner having their opinion. You get random developers who aren't really impacted by this decision having their opinions, and eventually you get the office lady who is asking something about completely irrelevant subjects. So it's not nice, and what we wanted to do is to divide micro-frontends by the domains, so have cross-functional teams working on their specific features. And while they, as a team, still need to coordinate on some high-level stuff like frameworks they use, state management approach, testing technologies, and whatnot, but they still have freedom about smaller things, and they don't really need people from the other teams to facilitate and participate into their smaller decisions they're making. So yeah, you have idea, you just try it. You try it quickly, you fail quickly, or you succeed quickly, and you move on. That was the goal. But that's not it. There was another problem which we struggled with, and we tried to solve by using micro-frontends. Like, imagine that you have the Frontend Circle, the gatekeepers of your front-end monolith. And those people go on call. Like, if something happens with your front-ends at night, they are going to be woken up. So they own. Then you get some developer who isn't really exactly a front-end engineer, but they think that they are very capable. And yeah, and they just commit something. They don't think much, it's just JavaScript. How much damage could it cause? They open the pull request, they go home, and they feel good about themselves. And you know who is this guy? This guy is you. And the guy who opened the pull request, where he is? He is not there because he is sleeping. He doesn't care about what happens. It's not him who is going to be paged. It's not him who is going to solve the problems caused. So that's not exactly a perfect scenario, and it makes developers feel unfair that they have to fix somebody else's code from time to time. And that's also something that we wanted to fix by dividing our code into domains and giving the ownership over domains to the feature teams who are working on those domains. So yeah, let's try to fix that and see what we can do. We decided at first, we didn't have obvious idea of going to Microfontance. So we decided, okay, let's just write a lot of tests. And that's what FreshBooks did over the course of 7 years of building this front-end monolith. And when I joined the company, we had around 10,000 front-end tests in total. And to make it worse, around 4,500 of those tests were end-to-end tests. Needless to say that end-to-end tests aren't exactly quick to run. And to give you an idea, like those 44 minutes, it's 6 extremely beefy machines running 60 tests in parallel and 60 Chrome instances each. So you have like 360 Chrome instances in parallel running your end-to-end test. And end-to-end tests need to poke some backends, which is going to receive 360 concurrent users doing a lot of things extremely quickly because it's not user. They're not waiting much between clicking the buttons, whatnot. So it wasn't also very stable for that reason. Like end-to-end tests aren't famous for being stable, and having connection between different pieces of your infrastructure is obviously a bottleneck here. So we had around 56% failure rate on our pull request, and you had to restart your pull request every time you fail, and you restart it for 3-4 times just to find out that, okay, actually this failure is genuine. It's me who failed. It's not the pipeline which is fake. So isn't really good for the trust of developers to the pipeline, not very good developer experience, and it takes a lot of time to get your code. So to give you an idea how much we have improved stuff by switching to Microfontance, you can see how much time did it take for us to build things. So we have pull request build, which was running around 45 minutes on a pipeline, and it's taking over 5 minutes now. When I made this presentation, it was a little bit less, but now I would say average time is around 5 minutes for each micro-frontend. And you build only specific micro-frontend which you have changed. You don't build all micro-frontends when you change one micro-frontend. And for the full pipeline, which is nearly twice the time of the PPR pipeline, because you need to run your tests once you merged everything to make sure that you merged it correctly, we have still a big win, because the second test we run here is still the old Endtoend test to make sure it's passing fine. So improvement is massive. And when we built proof of concept, it was very obvious for us that we want to move this direction, because the wins are really self-explanatory. So to summarize, we wanted to decentralize things. We wanted to make people be able to make decisions and be responsible for their decisions. We wanted to enable us to use newer technology without like doing big bang rewrites, throwing away our old micro-frontends, our old monolith frontends, and invest in tens of millions to rewrite our front end. And we wanted to decouple our pipelines. So when you deploy one micro-frontend, you don't need to deploy the rest of the code. There are multiple things which come to mind when people think about micro-frontends. And usually people think about horizontal splits, when you have, for example, a sidebar being built with one framework, some buttons being built with another framework, and the rest being built with something else. And that's kind of the most obvious approach to it, but there is also something what is called vertical split micro-frontends, where you have a shell and you have micro-frontends being used as the whole pages for the certain features. So you either have your old framework or you use the new framework within the old framework for certain features. And that's what we have opted for. How you can make your decision? You need to understand where you're going to render your micro-frontends, because all micro-frontends are coming with a big bundle size. Like if you're going to have 10 different frameworks, you're going to have 10 bundles within like megabyte or two each. And you need to understand what is going to render those micro-frontends. Like if you are doing it on the server, you can pre-populate data. It's going to be the same for most of the pages. Like imagine e-commerce websites. Like the product page is going to look nearly identical for all the customers who are going to open it. Then you can just render it on the server. You can serve it to the customer, and then you don't really care about many bundle sizes. But if you opt for a client-based, it means that every customer will have to download your bundles and combine them in the front end. And that's just something in between. So our concerns were that we have to do it on the front end. We don't have much reusable pages which we can pre-render, since all the pages are populated with the customer's data. And there is something more to it. Like if you want to set up server-side rendering, which is going to render pages for all customers, it's going to cost money. Somebody will have to go on call for these servers. Somebody will have to fix incidents, update dependencies, make sure that it's secure, whatnot. Developer experience with server-side rendering is a little bit more complicated. Pipelines, it introduces additional dependency which we want to remove. So it's also not exactly what we wanted. And it's hard. It's generally hard. We were concerned about learning curve, how easy it's going to be for developers to jump on the train. And that's actually a very important lesson we learned. Like you have to get your developers on board. You have to get different teams on board. And the easiest it is for them to start, the more developers you're going to get. If doing micro-frontends for them is going to be easier than what they do today, they're going to go to their manager and advocate them choosing their technology instead of you going to their manager and try to push them to use your technology. So it changes the dynamic, and it's much easier to convince people to switch if the new thing is actually easier. So how can you do it? It's going to be kind of high-level explanation of the steps you can you can do to approach the problem. First, we opted for a stronger Spartan, and I think that it makes sense for most of the applications which have like big monolith and they want to start moving over to micro-frontends. You start with something very big and scary, and you start introducing the good things in it. Eventually, you get big things outgrowing the old things. And in ideal world, perfect scenario gets good things completely eliminating the bad things. Usually, you're going to get stuck somewhere around step 2 with the different combinations of sizes of 2 parts, but you still unblock the good things for the new stuff, which we still consider again. So for many years to come, our company is going to stay in the step 2 until we naturally replace older things with the new things. So we approached the pattern, and then we decided to agree that, okay, what's going to be the boundary? That's a very important decision which you need to make before you build anything. And that's something what is very important to align, because if you will start building larger things, it's going to be easier to divide them than if you will build a lot of smaller things and then you'll decide to combine them together. Also, it's having a lot of implications on your testing strategy. If your microfontins are small enough, you will have to maintain the infrastructure which tests multiple micro-frontend frameworks at once. Like you, for example, want to write an integration test to check the feature, and you'll have to build multiple micro-frontend frameworks to test this feature. It is an indicator that your micro-frontends are too small for like in the context of vertical split. So we decided to go into the main approach where each feature, each page is the separate micro-frontend. In this way, we can still maintain those apps and some kind of whole states when we can run integration tests or end-to-end tests over them, and then divide them if we see that it's feasible and this domain becoming too big. And also there are a couple of additional considerations, like who is going to go on call for small micro-frontends. If you build a couple of hundreds of them, like who is going to go on call for different micro-frontends? Who is going to do service investments? Like something needs to be updated, like you want to upgrade React version. Who is going to go and do it for 200 applications? So all those considerations matter, and that's one of the reasons why you don't want to be all that enthusiastic about having too many micro-frontends. And that also adds issues around discoverability of your code. So like imagine that you have hundreds of repositories or hundreds of folders in one Monarepo. It's not very easy to understand what's going on. So about strategy, I wanted to say a couple of words. How did we approach things for the first micro-frontends? So the more time you get invested into building your first micro-frontends, the better it is. It's something what we learned at the high cost, and it's not something what we didn't really expect to happen. We were very honest with ourselves that we are making a mistake when we enabled teams to build micro-frontends too quickly. But that's something what costed us additional efforts later. So if you have uncertainties in your first example projects, or if you have some unpolished solutions, people are going to go and copy paste them across the other micro-frontends. And they're going to effectively multiply the mistakes you made across multiple micro-frontends, and then you'll have to go and fix all of them. That's why it's very important to sit together and invest as many time and efforts as you could into making sure that it's as good as it gets. In our case, it was hard to make happen for planning purposes. We got a team with very big projects who wanted to use micro-frontends, so that was a good opportunity for us to get on a train, get some marketing for what we are doing, and get a feature team using the technology which we offered. So we decided that, okay, we're going to sacrifice a little bit of our time in the future, and we'll have to refactor some things across the board later. But keep in mind that it's very important. It's also easier to educate people than refactor stuff later. That's why all different lessons, webinars, workshops, whatnot is very important. When we started enabling other teams to use Microfontins, we were offering them kind of a service as a team. When we come there, we set up, scaffold the Microfrontend for them. We explain their team how to work on it. We review their pull requests until they feel comfortable moving forward. So that has proven very effective, and I think that's in ideal world we should have done even more of this. Also be mindful about boundaries between what developers can do and what not. A good example is code sharing. Like if all Microfontins are using the same version of React, you can share it across all Microfontins. And then you're going to load like 300 kilobytes, for example, less on each Microfontent, on each page. But if you don't do it, you're going to get like all variation of different React versions. It's going to be like 18.1.1, 18.1.2, 18.2, and etc., etc. And besides having implications on how big your project is and how much time does it take to load the pages, you're also going to have all sorts of funny incompatibility issues. Like imagine that there are like libraries which work with one version and don't work with other versions on some bugs introduced in the newer version or whatnot. There is a lot of opportunity for pure joy and a lot of fun if you use a lot of different versions of stuff. So it's very important to understand what degree of freedom you want to give to people and what you want to enforce. And in our case, we've wrote a couple of scripts which check on a pipeline if you didn't change the versions of certain packages. Like if you decided to go and update the versions of the primary packages, you just couldn't merge the pull request. Tooling is helpful. Like the less work people need to do to create something, the less chance of them is to screw up. And yeah, it's also easier to convince people to do something instead of going back and changing something what they did before.
Wise, were you like an architecture team or with like feature teams as well, or how were the sort of teams organized for the setup?
Yeah. So our teams are all platform front-end teams. So we are responsible for making sure that other teams are enabled to build front-end in the way that's good enough. So we weren't building features ourselves. We were building the infrastructure, and we were helping other teams to start building their features with the micro-frontend approach we designed. Yeah. So basically, that's how it looks for us now. We have older pages which don't even load the React app, and we have newer pages which load React, and we use React on those pages. Basically, all those Microfontins up, they're being deployed to the buckets since they are just a bunch of static JavaScript files. There are a bunch of chunks, but still, nevertheless, it's just the folder with the assets. If you want to roll back something, you just deploy the other folder. It's nearly instantaneous, so it's handy. And the parent application has the special utility which knows on which routes what kind of React microfontends we need to fetch from the backends and what we need to deploy. In this way, we load our microfontends on demand, which means that if you never reached the page which contains microfontent, you wouldn't ever load any code which is related to microfontends. So in this way, it's not impacting your performance of your parent application in any way. Like you open the dashboard, it's virtually the same loading time as it was before. And that helps a lot. It also helps to start this progressive growth without having those hard discussions of should we sacrifice our performance standards and expectations, how we are going to work around it, and so on and so on. So all different applications could be located in different Git repositories and be deployed throughout one or different pipelines. We opted to have everything Microfontins related in a Monarepo. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. But yeah, generally just check what Microfontent has been changed, and then you deploy it. It's important to understand that it all comes with additional bundle size. And until you moved from that state of where you have two things to the state where you have one thing, you are more likely going to have worsened performance across the board. Like you will have to load extra bundles for your Microfontins page, and it's not going to be instantaneous. James, I think you wanted to ask some question and I interrupted you.
No, I was just thinking on the performance and bundle size. So what about the performance as well? Because you have to execute more JavaScript, I suppose, as well as load it in.
Yeah. So basically, execution of the JavaScript isn't the biggest toll we had to pay. The biggest toll we pay is actually the loads of the bundles. And we measure the speed of how much does it take for our customers to download things. And it's very easy to overlook what equipment and networks people actually use in the wild when you're sitting in the office with your fancy MacBook, whatnot. But in reality, it's often not like that. Performance, like actual performance on the page, it depends. We have pages where Microfontins are actually faster if they built right, but it's not something what you can directly advertise because it depends a lot on what's the original performance of the code was, for which reasons it was slow, if it was slow, and how good did you write a good, like not good, but your Microfontins. And also, to be honest, please go.
Oh, sorry, Alex, just how many do you have on like one page in terms of like the page with the most micro front ends?
We have 2 Microfontins being available at a time on all pages. And it's kind of an exception situation because we have OmniSearch. You can hit your shortcut and you get OmniSearch appearing over everything else, like as an overlay, and you can search across the application. We built it with React. But generally, we don't let people to use multiple Microfontins on a page at once. It's not technical limitation, it's organizational limitation. We decide that we don't want people to exchange data between Microfontins. It adds a lot of complexity, and we are not confident that we can effectively organize this work, that we can effectively maintain that, and that we are not going to screw up in the grand scheme of things. I see the question in the chat about...
Yeah, Andrew's got one here. So any particular bundler Alex could recommend in the context of this deck?
Yeah, we opted for Vite. We started with Webpack, but sooner we migrated over to Vite, which helped us to reduce the bundle size. And yeah, and it's also much quicker, so we are pretty happy about Vite. I know that there are a bunch of other ones out there. I think there is TurboPack or something like this, which is written with Rust. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm not going to say that our option is the best, but comparing to what we had with Webpack, we are happy with our switch to Vite.
Richard has got a question for you as well. Did you need to share any context data from the Ember host shell, e.g. identity information?
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting question. I could have another slide about it, but I'm going to answer that now. Basically, one of critical questions you need to answer first is how are you going to exchange the data between parent shell and the microfontends. One way is having some publisher subscriber bus in your front end, which is going to publish data in the queue every time you get something, and microfontends are going to consume it, and vice versa. I did it before in another company, and while it works, it also takes toll on how independent the apps are, how do you test them, and it kind of bounds them together. So you cannot run the app in isolation easily and fetch all the data independently for it. So we opted into having all our microfontends individual, so they can run separately from the shell app if they need to. And the only thing which shell app provides to our microfontends is authentication token, which you need to authorize your request moving forward. It has downside, very obvious downside. Often we have to fetch duplicate data from the server. Like we have some web pages which fetch the same thing twice. And yeah, we just live with that, hope that our backend caching is good enough, and we accept the sacrifice.
Thank you.
Okay. Project structure. That's extremely interesting topic because we started with many repos, and eventually we moved over to one repo after trying things. So 1.5 years ago, we had ambition of having our components library being eventually open sourced, which led us to obvious decision to have our components library as the separate repository, as the separate pipeline, which would deploy assets to the Artifactory, and our microfontins are going to consume our components library, and yeah, and everybody was supposed to be happy. The problem here is that versioning is not fun. You get multiple microfontins using different versions of components library, and you get to communicate changes and socialize the changes a lot, and you need to poke people to upgrade their components library. Local developer experience is not fun because you need to link to local repositories. And for example, you have your microfontins asking for updated component. Like you're working on it. Just a second. I went a little bit ahead, but so how it works on the pipeline? You have microfontent which needs the components or helper. You build it, you deploy it, you consume it, you rebuild it, and then it's good. But when you work on it locally, it's not exactly very straightforward. Like you have your microfontends running locally in the watch mode. When you change something locally, it updates it for you automatically, it rebuilds it. But you want to change your components and you want to debug it instantly. And if you don't do any extra steps, you will have to stop Watcher here. You'll have to build your components library. You'll have to go here. You will have to update the dependency, and you will have to rebuild it again. Like there are different solutions which help to make it less painful, but I cannot say that it was very straightforward, and we had to communicate its usage to people more frequently than we would like to. That's the first problem. And the second problem, again, versioning was completely unnecessary. We didn't encounter any value from having stuff versions. So eventually we decided to start moving everything to Monarepo. So we have helpers as a part of our Monarepo, and we are working on moving components library back to Monarepo as well. Now it's used as sub-dependency, so we don't have versioning already. But from our experience, Monarepo solves a lot of problem. You have to need to use a little bit more complicated pipeline, which is smart enough to understand what exactly did you change and what folder did you change. And we also have to use special tooling which enables us to prevent people from importing stuff in the way they're not supposed to import. But besides that, we see mostly wins with the Monarepo. So yeah, that's how we evaluated different solutions for building it locally. Like we started with
Another
different.
question, Alex, before you go on. So Andrew is just wondering, when you talk about components, do you mean React components or web components or something else?
Yeah, I'm talking about React components, but we also use web components as the shells for our microfontins. So basically, all microfontins are rendered within the web component. It helps us to separate CSS, encapsulate CSS, have separate scopes for JavaScript and whatnot.
Oh, cool, thank you.
Yeah, so basically it's the story of our journey. We started with separate repos. We had a lot of pain. We started using npm link. We reduced the amount of pain. We started using sub-repositories and it was better. And Monarepo feels good across the board. So there is a good article about Monarepos. I am going to share my slides. You can read it later, but it's very convincing about why Monarepo might be your choice. And I'm personally also a big fan of Monarepos. And I don't know if anybody here worked in Google, but actually in Google, they have a very big Monarepo for everything. You can't even clone it on one machine. You have to do selective cloning for this Monarepo if you want to work on something. But it's also very interesting example of Monarepo usage. So a lot depends if you're building stuff from scratch or you have an older app. If you're building from scratch, there are a couple of good things which you could use. You can run single SPA as your shell wrapper, and it's good. There is nothing bad to say about it. There is Webpack Module Federation, which helps to organize separate builds for separate things if you're using Webpack. And there is Pyro, which is alternative to single SPA. There are much more, but those are the ones I heard positive feedbacks about, and we actually considered tweaking those to use for ourselves. And state management, I have been asked about this before, so we're going to go through it quicker. You could have some communication layer between your parent app and your child app, and it's going to work. But we decided we will not do it. So we have authentication data being passed. In our case, it's cookie. Since all our micro-frontend apps are web components, it technically supports passing properties from the parent app. So you can do it if you want, but it's like one-way data transfer. Like you can have some data for initializing your micro-frontend apps, but it doesn't go beyond that. We share observability and marketing tooling because basically Google Tag Manager and Datadog scripts, they don't care what JavaScript exactly failed on the page. And you can just use them. They are in the window. And beta flags, like we are using beta flags in the both parent and children applications.
A quick question from Andrew as well. So just taking us back a little bit earlier to the build time. So Andrew was wondering if there's model pipelines for the single Monarepo.
Yeah, we run check of what files have been changed in the pull request. So we compare pull request to the branch we're trying to merge it, and we see the diff. And if the diff contains only files within specific microfontins, we build only this specific microfontins. It is done through very ugly, hardly comprehensible bash scripts, which we wrote and I doubt we could read it anymore. But it's not so hard to do it. Like it took us a couple of days to get there, and now it just works. It gets more interesting when you change something into the code which is shared. For example, you have your util folders and you want to change util. And then in ideal world, you want to track down what are the consumers of that specific util which you have changed, and you want to run tests on those microfontins as well. And that's something what we didn't handle gracefully. So now basically when you change something in the components folder or you change something in the utils folder, we rebuild everything what could possibly use it. So to answer in the original question, when you build one Microfontance, we are extremely happy about build times. Usually it takes quicker, it's quicker to build than to review pull request. But if you change the components, then you have to wait like 20, 25 minutes. Also, it's like all easy to parallelize, since all those builds are independent. When you start building all Microfontans, they are going to build in parallel. So it's actually more of the cost question and not much of time question.
Do you have many tests that cover like the integration of the micro front ends and have it all together as a classic end-to-end test?
We have one end-to-end test. It helps us to ensure sanity. There were a couple of incidents when we broke parent application through our Microfontance, where we were experimenting with how we render web components, how do we approach encapsulation of CSS scope and whatnot. And then we decided, okay, we're going to have one end-to-end test on staging, which is going to check that our build is not breaking the parent app. Besides that, we don't provide our developers a possibility to write end-to-end tests for the React applications. It's deliberate limitation in our big strategy of fighting back against end-to-end tests and FreshBooks.
And it's worked well, as definitely would help with build time, but it's not had more regression bugs or anything come through.
No, the whole point is that there are often a good or even better alternative about test which you can use. It's just not the easiest kind of test to write. We come into a very interesting discussion of why people write end-to-end tests, and primarily it's because it's easy to write them. You don't need to work into codes to write end-to-end tests.
Sometimes it's because you have testers who know how to write end-to-end tests, but they're not necessarily developing on the code, but they know how to use end-to-end testing frameworks and things like that.
But in our case, we have developers who write those tests.
Yes.
And still, developers often opt into end-to-end tests because they don't have to mock anything. They don't have to make their codes designed to be tested. It also makes a lot of difference how you wrote code in the first place. Some code is much easier to test than the other code. So we have a very straightforward alternative for people who still want to write end-to-end tests. It's so-called acceptance test. It's basically end-to-end test where you use your mocks instead of the backends. So we have a mock server which acts as a backend, and you just run the test against the server. There is a question in the chat about additional security measures.
Okay. Yeah, so are there any additional security measure we need to consider while using micro-frontends? That sounds like a question that might have a long answer to.
Yeah. So first of all, you need to run audits on your dependencies for every single micro-frontend you have. Like, while the criticality of frontends vulnerabilities is often, not always, but often not as high as like backend vulnerabilities, you can still get highly unpleasant surprises. So there are different ways to automate it, and you can run tests on dependencies. The most popular option, I think, is Sneak. A lot of people use Sneak to check what's going on with their dependencies. But it's getting very interesting if you go into depth of letting people outside of your organization build micro-frontends for your frontends. So that's something that we were discussing when we started micro-frontend strategy. Eventually, we want to enable third-party developers to build plugins which are going to change the interface in the app. And that means that third-party developers might build micro-frontends which are going to be a part of our interface. And then you want to have some layer which is going to prevent those micro-frontends from stealing any data from the parent applications or something like this. And that's the moment when it gets interesting. Like then you have to wrap something in iframe, ensure that there is no ways to communicate the data from bottom to the top and whatnot. So then it's becoming more interesting, yes.
I better let you get back to the presentation. Actually, we're
Yeah.
way late with lots of questions. So
It's good. We are nearly done.
Yeah, people are interested, as you can see, though. So go for it.
Yeah, I'm very open to stay as long as it takes to answer all the questions. Yep. So yeah, leaking stuff. You can see that iframe, there were some performance implications which we didn't really like. And it wasn't as flexible as web components. Web components are actually perfect. I wrote downside just because I wanted to find something, but I doubt anybody is still supporting EE6. You can trust people, and again, like in perfect world, it would make sense, but people tend to make mistakes unintentionally. And in case of CSS, you can use scoped CSS. And that's something what we utilize partially. We use Tailwinds for our design system for Microfontins. And we prefixed all the classes which Tailwind has. In this way, they remain unique. Even if we break something in our wrapper, which stops us from leaking stuff, we still ensure that it's unique and unlikely to be impacted by the parent CSS. So, should you build Microfontins? I don't know if this community knows about Dan Abramov. That's the guy who is the godfather of Redux and very popular in front-end community, but he's not a big fan. And I want to use this code to make a thing. For us, Microfontance was a good solution to make our life less painful. But I would actually discourage you from using Microfontance just because you want to use them, because it's fancy and you think it's going to make your developers happier trying new stuff. Don't do it. On this note, thanks everybody. It was really nice presenting here, and let's do another round of questions if you have any.
Thank you very much, Alex. Can you tell us a bit more on the plus and minus, maybe on the micro frontends? You kind of left us hanging there a little bit of more information of when you would and wouldn't, maybe. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Pros is definitely a possibility to break stuff into smaller pieces, reduce the risk, and enable people to build modern things with modern technologies. There's definitely a big positive which helped us a lot. Separate alerting for different teams is also something what you get to do with Microfontance is good. Pipelines. 5 minutes to build a pipeline is just groundbreaking. Like for us, it's making a lot of difference. It's one of the biggest selling points which we have when we go to other teams and we say, you can build your pipeline, your micro-frontend in 5 minutes. So that's the good thing. On the negatives, there is a lot of supervision necessary. You get fragile and complicated pipeline, which you get to fix eventually. You need to maintain package versions. And I can give you an example. It didn't happen to FreshBooks yet, but I think it's just a matter of time until it happens and folks will have to solve it in some shape or form. In one of the previous companies, we had TypeScript, React, and typings for this React triangle. And we wanted to update React, but newer React didn't work with older TypeScript. So you had to update TypeScript. But to update TypeScript, you need to update typings for the React. And changing just two of those were always causing a lot of errors. which we had to fix. We ended up spending around 1.5 months for 2 developers just fixing incompatibility issues. And when you have a lot of smaller things which use specific locked versions of the frameworks, eventually you might get in the place where you have to go microfrontend by one microfrontends, upgrade those versions, and do it in a bulk so it doesn't break altogether. So there might be big refactorings necessary eventually. Yeah.
Thank you for going through those. I suppose there's also the one, I mean, you mentioned it before, was the the bundle size, I suppose, something.
Yeah, bundle size is definitely impactful. There is no way how you can make it quicker than original app unless your original app supports lazy loading. Like if, for example, we were in the position when pages containing microfontins wouldn't load the parts of the old application and would load microfrontent instead, then we could fight for actually decreasing the total bundle size. But since we load the whole application fully anyways, we basically introduce the additional bundle size, which reduces performance. So yeah, that's definitely a downside. And depending on what kind of application and what your expectations from time to render are, I think you might either accept the sacrifice or not. Like in our case, if developer has already, not developer, but customer has already paid for the app, it's not going to immediately stop them from using the app if it takes like 4 seconds instead of 3 seconds to load it. Like while it's not good and we strive to make it better and we actually invest a lot of time into performance, it doesn't penalize us as, for example, we were building e-commerce website and Google would like lower our position into the list of results just because our website is slow. So it's not like public web facing. And if you're like facing web publicly, I think you are more sensitive to increase the bundle size than we are.
Thank you very much, Alex. So there are some questions as well in the chat. So we've got one here about recommendations between single SPA and module federation methods.
Yeah, those two aren't exactly the same. So I can imagine single SPA working with module federation together, which I didn't try, so I wouldn't speculate much. We experimented with single SPA. We were happy about that. We experimented with module federation before we moved over to Vid as a part of our setup, and it was also good. And it helps you to maintain a lot of infrastructure things more gracefully. So I would definitely suggest you using something instead of building it from scratch if you can. So module federation is extremely proved by time, while widely used, and I think that I can easily recommend it.
Sounds good. And Steve's got a question here as well. Are there any issues updating the NPM packages after NPM audit highlights new security issues?
Yeah. It depends on the package. Like we use Dependable, which automatically bumps the versions of the packages once new minor packages appear. So it opens the pull request. If pull request builds and tests pass successfully, we just merge this pull request. This way we ensure that we don't have too many old packages. The problem are going to be if, for example, we are a couple of minor versions of React behind and somebody finds vulnerability in the React itself, because it might make us do some breaking changes, and then we'll have to go to different microfrontends and change them to enable this merge. So yeah, it really depends on what package is actually vulnerable.
Cool. And one more from Andrew here. Are you using ESM or CJS as the baseline?
Yeah, we actually use ESM. We started using ESM once we migrated to Vite. I think for the purpose it was supported out of the box. And I would say that we had quite a good deal of confusion between CJS and ESM once we did so. We had packages which are CJS and they're not exactly compatible with ESM when we build stuff with Vite. Yeah, and I don't think that we solved it in any conceptually good way. I think we just tackled it one by one. And I'm not sure if we fully understand all the issues we had. Like there was a lot of tinkering around and just fixing stuff until it got fixed.
Fair enough. Any more? Let's see. We got one more from Andrew. No, he's been talking about ESM build was helpful for that. Cool. And sorry, ES build. Any other questions, or we'll move on to the JetBrains license questions for the audience to give away the JetBrains license. Richard's got a note about Vite is looking at dropping CJS support in version 5. All right, I'll take that as the end of the questions for Alex. So thank you for your patience with all the questions too. Hang on, you got any other ones? No other questions. All right, so now I was making some notes during the presentation, so I have to think which questions to ask you actually. So let me see. We'll start with an easy one, right? So what did, in terms of the repos, what did Alex start with originally and then finish up with in terms of repos? First correct answer wins the JetBrains license. The first of them. You can't answer, Alex. That's not allowed.
Oh, was it the question to me?
No.
The audience put it in the chat. Yeah. Strangely, we haven't had any replies yet. Maybe they're just coming through. Let's see. Here's from the Monarepo part. Not he started. Any other? Yeah, I think Raymond, you just missed out there slightly because you said you weren't sure how it started. But my understanding was multiple repos, right, Alex? Is that right?
We started with multiple repos to finish this Monarepo.
So I think we've got Faris V. Sorry if I've mispronounced that as the winner there for that one. And Raymond, you can try for the next question. Sorry about that. I don't know. Did I give you a license before? I think I did. So that hopefully lasts a little longer. So please send me in the meetup message your email address and I'll send you through the license. Okay, cool. And now let me think for another question. So what were 2 advantages of using the micro-frontend approach? And 1 disadvantage, one not as well. Make it slightly harder. 2 advantages, 1 disadvantage. Or you go more. Andrew, do you need any more licenses? I'm sure you think quite a few answers there. Standing by. Yeah, sorry, Richard. I moved the goalposts. Made life harder. And also, like, unfairly balanced it towards the advantages too. So we've got Raymond's got definitely an answer to the first part, and additional overhead of not big projects. So Raymond, it looks pretty good, Raymond. maybe I should really just give it to you since, yeah, that was the original question anyway, without me adding more to the goalpost. All right, Raymond. So drop me a meetup message so I don't forget. And sorry, Mr. Praju, I'll give you a license next time, I'm sure. So come back next month, and your audition will come back. So you can see other console that we have. So additional overhead for not big projects. And those were decentralization, breaking into manageable ownership, and we had separate pipelines as well. That being an advantage, I guess. Yep. And decoupling the pipelines. And Andrew's got reproducible builds, hopefully. Yes. All right. Well, thank you everyone for answering. And as usual, we're always happy to have new speakers. Now we are booked up until next year, but if you have something you want to talk about, please drop me a line, and we can slot you in the future and talk about what you want to share with the group. And a big thank you again to Alex for such a polished and interesting talk and answering all our questions very, very well as well. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks everybody for coming. It was a pleasure to speak.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It's been really great today.
And also a big thank you to Francis for joining as the co-organizer.
Yeah. I'm a bit quiet today because I haven't figured out how to log in and actually participate in the comments, but hopefully that will change next. I'm ready to go.
Thanks everyone. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks everyone.
Good night.
All right. We'll see you next month. Bye.
All right. Ciao.